Hey everyone, back with another video on the Qiewa Q1 Hummer. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the rear braking system, showing you how to replace the brake pads and adjust the brakes. So let's have a look at it. Alright, so start off that, let's take a look at the different parts here. Number one, you got your wheel with the disc on it, the silver metal disc here, which is what your brake pads basically push up against to start the wheel when it's running, when you activate the brakes. The inner pad that's on this side over here actually stays put. It doesn't move at all. The outer pad over here, when you push on the brakes, the outer pad actually moves in. So it's kind of like this. If you could think of my fingers as the brake pads, the inner one stays put. When you pull on the lever, the brake lever, the outer pad moves over, presses on the disc, and presses it into the inner disc brake pad. So again, this inner one stays put, the outer one will press over and actually will push the disc over till it gets pinched between the two pads. So that's one thing. It's unlike a bicycle. I think on bikes both the pads will move like this, whereas on this, the inner pad is put. I could be wrong about that bike thing, but on this, the inner one stays put, definitely. The outer one is the one that moves, pushes the disc over until you get pinched on there. So that's how it stops you. The red part here is the caliper. That's where obviously the brake pads are inside there. The one on the outside's on this side. The one on the inside's over there. And as you can see, the disc fits in between. Oops, sorry about that. In between the pads there, as it rotates. It's kind of hard to see here, but if you get rubbing, then the disc is rubbing on one pad or the other, and there's things you can do about that. But to start with, let's just continue on here. What I'm going to do now is start with, I'm going to remove this whole piece here, this whole red piece, the caliper. And first thing I got to do is, I've got tie wrap here tying these wires together. I want to get rid of that so when I pull this off I can have some room to work with on it. So let me do that first. So I clipped off that zip tie here, so I freed my wires up. This is my motor wire here that I had just tie wrapped to the brake cable there, mainly just to keep the motor wire from flapping around. Brake cable is pretty stiff as it is. Anyway, got that out of the way. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen this screw here, which is clamping on the brake cable wire, and that gives you your tension for your inner pad. So when you pull on that, basically when you pull on the brake handle, this kind of pushes up like this, which in turn pushes this outer pad in towards the disc. So for right now, I'm just going to loosen that up, which is going to make the inner disc just kind of back off. I already had a little bit loose, so okay, so now you can see I've got that. It's sliding down there now. Now you notice that the arm here has slid further back down. That's going to basically pull the inner brake pad back in, so it's not anywhere near the disc, and that's what I kind of want to do. Just get that one out of the way for now. We'll worry about that later, adjusting those. Now I'm not going to take this all the way out. I'm just going to make sure it's nice and loose, so it's not holding that cable at all. And again, the reason to do that, you can see it's nice and loose now. The reason I did that is to just have the outer pad be recessed more inside the caliper to get it out of the way. Another thing while we're at it here, there's a threaded adjustment here that you can do. Once you have your brakes adjusted and all is done, this is like a fine-tune adjustment you can use to if you have your brakes tightened, everything's the way you want it to be. If you need to adjust them a little bit, if you screw this piece out counterclockwise, it tends to pull on the cable, which will push the inner pad in a little bit. So if your brakes were too loose, you could unscrew this a little bit basically and then tighten up your brakes a little bit. Contrary to that, if the brakes are too tight or maybe the outside pad's rubbing a little bit, you can screw it back in to move the pad back out a little bit. So counterclockwise on this will give you tighter brakes. Turning it back in will loosen them again. For now, I'm not going to worry about that. Before we go to adjust these, I want to make sure that this is all the way threaded in clockwise, so that way when we go to adjust the brakes later, I can use that as a fine tune by unscrewing it. Okay, so now we got this going here. Next thing I'm going to do is remove these two screws, this one here and this one here, so I can basically then pull the entire caliper up off of the disc. And rather than trying to film this, because I'm going to have to torque on this a little bit more, I'm just going to pause here. I got those two screws out of the caliper that's holding it on, there and there. And keep when you work anything on these screws, keep an eye on your hardware, where it goes and such. These screws each have a washer on them that go on there before they go back in the hole, so make sure you keep track of that stuff. It's a good idea to get like a box or somewhere to put your parts when you're working on it. I've got one of these magnetic trays which works really good. That way, if tips over or whatever, it's not going to dump my parts onto the ground. Okay, so we got those two off now, and now we should just be able to lift this entire caliper up off the disc and off the frame, like so. Okay, so that's pretty easy, taking your caliper off. Just go flip it over like this now, and take a look at it here. So now on the inside there is where our brake pads are, and you can see there's this little tab sticking out here. Sorry about that wire there. There's a little tab sticking out there and a little tab sticking out there. Those are actually your brake pads. They're held in here by magnets. So first let's take a look at them, get them out. First thing I'm going to do now to get the brake pads out, because it's really hard to get them out through that small gap in the caliper there. It's almost, I don't know if it's even possible. So the first thing I got to do is take on the inner side, I'm going to put an Allen wrench in this middle of this piece and unthread it, and this will just thread all the way out, and then we'll be able to get the brake pads. One warning, on the outer side where the arm is, do not loosen this screw here. I have seen some other video where a guy was loosening that to try and adjust the inner pad, the outer pad, in or out. I don't recommend doing that. Your play on this arm is going to control the outer pad going in and out. So by how tight you have this cable, that will control that. If you loosen this too far, there's a spring inside here that keeps the arm, pressure on the arm when you're cabling it. And if you take the screw too far out, that spring's going to pop, and this thing will come apart. And it's not too terribly fun to put that back together. I actually did it once, and I got it back together, but I wish I'd never touched that screw. So on mine, and I suggest you do the same, just make sure the screw's tightened all the way. For play on that pad, you can just use by adjusting this arm, the tension on this cable will adjust how far in and out that pad goes on this side. Okay, so again, anyway, we're going back to the inner pad now. This part you do remove. I'm just going to get an Allen wrench in there and unscrew. This is threaded in, so I'm just going to unscrew this whole black piece, and then we'll be able to get at the inner pad. Alright, so I've got this just about unscrewed all the way. I'm just going to do the rest by hand. And then this whole black piece comes out. Now you can see the brake pad's coming out with it. And that's because this piece I unscrewed here is magnetized. There's a big magnet on this side. And the back of the brake pad is metal, of course, so the brake pad will just stick to it. So that came out with the black piece. Got my inner brake pad out, and I've already recently just changed my brake pads because I had the rear wheel off. I was changing the rear tire and such. So I already did that. Here's one of my old ones. And I don't know, to me it doesn't look like there's a whole lot of wear on the old one. So I don't know that these brake pads really wear down that quickly. I guess they're pretty durable. I put 800 miles on before I changed these, and yeah, I'm not really hard on my brakes anyway. I tend to coast up to stops, not just lay on the brakes. I suppose if you used them harder, they might wear out faster. But my old ones didn't look bad, so I'm just saving those for spares. And yeah, they look pretty good. Anyway, I just figured I'd do this just to show you guys. So I got my inner brake pad out. Now if we look down inside of here, you can basically see through to, through the hole, and then you can see the other brake pad on the other side. Now again, there's this tab here is part of the back metal part of the brake pad. So what you want to do is just grab that tab and push it out into the slot there. Maybe get some needle nose pliers or a small screwdriver or something and grab it, because it's magnetized on the other side too, so it's going to tend to go back in there. But once you grab it, what you're trying to do is push it all the way through so it comes out the same way that the inner pad did, because again, it's going to be too wide to fit through this gap here, so you got to kind of, there, you see I kind of pushed it through there. And again, because that magnet's going to want to go back in there, so you got to get something behind it and then just kind of push it through there. Of course it's going to give me some trouble now. If I can get my thumb on it, then I can grab it from this side, and then you got to get that tab so it's going to fit through there too, because that's going to hold it up. And it's really not that hard though. I'm making it look hard here. Yeah, of course it's gonna give me some trouble. There we go. Oh, it just kind of fell out of there. So anyway, you can see now through the hole. There's the other side. You can see the magnet in there, that round piece in the middle. So that's it. Our brake pads are out. My other one rolled away here, but they're both out. And at this point, I would clean this thing up a little bit and just use some brake parts cleaner like you would for car brakes. Spray it in there, clean it up good. And so I'll do that real quick here, and then we'll continue. Alright, I got the inside of that cleaned out pretty good. Just gave it a couple blasts, like I said, with this auto brake parts cleaner. Just gives a couple sprays on there. It dries real quick, cleans out the dirt, so that works really good. So that's nice and clean. Now, next thing would be if you're replacing your brake pads, you would start with new brake pads. In this case, since I just did it, I'm going to reuse my old ones. Like, yeah, I literally just put them in there a month ago. One thing though, I don't know if this is going to help or not, but if you have brakes that maybe your brakes squeal or make a lot of noise, like a screeching sound or squealing sound when you're applying them, could be due to like some glazing or something on the pad surface itself. Not so much on my new ones, but my older ones I can kind of see that a little bit. Perhaps a little glazing on there. So again, I don't know that this would help, but you could try taking some just a fine grade sandpaper like this, and then just taking your brake pad and just rubbing it on there a little bit, trying to get the glaze off it, and it is taking it off a little bit, so that looks good. I can see it on the sandpaper there. So I'm just going to do that. Probably would be better to lay this on a flat surface when you do it, but I'm not going to do it that much. Again, these are pretty new pads. So yeah, it just took I can see it's taken like the outer edge of the pad off. I don't know if you can tell, but the pad's a lot lighter colored now. It's hard to see in this light, sorry about that, but that seems to be working okay. Let me just do a little bit more where I can see it's been wearing. Yeah, that seems to work. Seems to work pretty good. Again, I don't know if that's going to help with the noise if you're having noisy brakes. Looks good. I always, my thought on squeaky brakes is normally dust or something, dust or dirt on your rotor here and your brake pads. Another thing we could do, which I'll do in a minute, is take some alcohol, maybe on a piece of cotton or rag, and then just clean off this disc here. Yeah, from my experience and from what I know on disc brakes, dirt, dust in between the pads and the disc can cause noise. So just another thing I'll try. I'm going to do this other pad now real quick. Just rub it down here a little bit, and I'm kind of going in a circular motion, and you're not just in the same direction every time. Trying to mix it up a little bit just so it doesn't. That looks pretty good too. Okay, so again, I don't know if that's really going to help, but if your pads are glazed, you know, kind of glazed or glossy looking, that can certainly, let me get in the light a little bit better now. You can see this maybe a little bit better. It's a nice light brown color where before it was kind of a more darker polished look. So yeah, I think that was a pretty good thing to do actually. Now again, just because I did that, I'm going to set these on the ground real quick here, and I'm going to hit them with this brake parts cleaner, just get any dust off them. It's probably overkill I did there, but this stuff will dry really quick. And you pick them up, kind of shake off the excess. The other one here. Some there, and they'll dry pretty quick. That brake parts cleaner stuff dries like really quick. As you can see, you can actually see it drying on the ground there. Okay, so let's dry off the backs a little bit, and I'm going to let them sit for a second, and then we'll go ahead and throw them back into the caliper. Before we do that, I just want to show you real quick. Here's one of my old brake pads, and as you can tell, you can kind of see that glossiness to it where it'd been rubbing. So I'm going to do hit this one with sandpaper real quick, and then we'll take another look at it. Okay, so I sanded it a little bit and cleaned it with the brake parts cleaner, and as you can see, that looks a lot better. There's no more glossiness to it. It almost looks like a brand new pad now actually. There's plenty of pad left on there, so these didn't wear much in the 800 miles I rode on these. Again, this is one of my original pads. Looks pretty good though, looks almost brand new. So I think sanding them with a very fine grit sandpaper is probably a good idea. And this, just for your information, is a P120 medium smooth by 3M, and it's really just a real fine grit on it. Okay, so let's move back along here. Going back to the scooter, and first thing we're going to do is put the brake pads back in to the caliper. I don't remember which one was on which side, but it doesn't really matter because neither one is really worn at this point. And after sanding them down especially, they are pretty much brand new. So I'm going to just take one of them and take my caliper here. I'm going to put this one into the inside there. Again, there's a tab on these. You can see this tab sticking out. and you're going to want to position it so that tab is sticking in the slot on the inside. Again, this is, well, actually it's not too wide. I can get this one in this way, so I'm just going to position it and then push that tab over, and the magnet should take over then and just pull it into there. And you can see it just did. It just snapped in. There's the pad on the inside. The tab is in that groove there. I'm just going to take my finger and make sure it's in there good, and it appears to be. Okay, so our inner pad is in there. Pretty easy. The magnets make it simple. They'll grab the back of it and position it in place. Okay, so now that's our outer pad, and again, that's the one that's going to move when you pull on the brake lever. The outer pad is going to, well, I just pushed it all the way out. I was trying to demonstrate how the pad will push, but you can see when you pull on the cable, that pushes the arm, so it pushes that cable out. Okay, so that's back in there. That's good. Next, we want to put the outer pad in. So we're going to take this threaded piece again. We're just going to take the brake pad. Now because the other pad's in there, I can't just put it through the slot there. So this one I'm going to have to kind of stick back in through the outer portion here. Again, trying to line up that tab close to where it should be. And I really don't need to put it in there right now. I just want to get it kind of inside so it stays by itself. You can see I got the tab is in the slot there. Now I just want to start threading this thing in. And again, once I get it up there, the magnet's going to straighten it out. Okay, so now I'm just starting to thread it. And that's sitting in there nicely now. Just going to take a small screwdriver just to double check, make sure that's pushed in there good. Seems to be on both sides. Okay, now we're going to continue to thread this in. And this is the part where you have to do your first adjustment, because this is going to dictate how far you thread this in. It's going to dictate how far that pad pushes out into the opening there. You got to have it out to some degree. If you don't have the pad sticking out far enough in here, in other words, if it's recessed back into this part, then when you push on the brake, there's no pad on the other side. You just go push the rotor into the metal. So you need to have this sticking out to some degree. So I'm just looking down inside of here, and I know it's hard to see. I'm just looking down inside of this space here, and turning this in clockwise until I see my pad on that side start to protrude from the red metal. And at this point, it's just a guessing game, how far you want that to stick through there. Okay, so I've got it to a certain extent, and it's protruding a little bit from this side. Now here's the thing. When you mount this back onto your rim, I've got a little diagram I drew here. So let's say this is your tire. Here's your disc, and there's your brake pads there. Now this inner one again doesn't move. When you pull on the brake pad, it forces this outer pad into the disc, which then pushes it up against this inner pad here. So the idea is you want your inner pad as close to this disc as possible without rubbing on it. So when the outer pad pushes on it, you're not actually bending your disc over to get to the other pad. So we want to get this inner disc as close as possible to that disc. We want that inner pad to be as close as possible to that disc. So that's what we're trying to do here. Again, to start with, it's just kind of a guessing game because there's several adjustments on here. As you can see, there's the holes in the caliper itself are oval, they're not round, so there's some play in there. So when you put this on here and your screws are loose, you can move it one way or the other a little bit. So there's a little adjustment in that. These screws here hold this metal bracket on that the caliper mounts to, and each one of them, on mine, I have a washer behind it, behind the screw, so that too will dictate a little bit of movement, whether you have a screw in there or a washer in there or not. Mostly though, it's going to be this adjustment with this oval hole here. And then also additionally, these two screws here, which hold this whole bracket down to the frame, as you can see, they're oval as well, so that whole piece can slide forward or backward to some extent as well. So there's several adjustments here. On mine, and I'm just going to leave it this way, it looks like this metal bracket is slid all the way back as far as possible, because I can see there's more clearance in those holes right there. So this piece is basically all the way back, then these screws are tightened. That's really just going to change the position of the pads on the disc here. I haven't had any problems with that, so I'm not going to mess with that now. And I'm not going to mess with this either. These pieces I'm just going to leave tightened, and I'm just going to now place this back on the disc here. Now before we do that, let's take a look back here at the disc itself on the wheel. And as I roll the wheel, it's going to be a lot hard to see it on the camera, but I'm looking to see if there's any wobble or any place where the rotor bends in a little bit. And I don't see anything terribly obvious, but I've gone through this process before, so it's not a big deal. If you did have like an area where you clearly, like at one part of the rim you saw it, one part of the disc you saw it like go in or something, or come out this way a little bit because it's bent, what I normally do is I mark where that spot is with my finger, roll the disc down to the bottom, and then use like a rubber mallet and pound on a little bit to bend it in that way. If we're bent this way, you could maybe get a screwdriver or a pair of pliers or something, maybe with a rag on it so you don't mark up your disc, and then bend it out accordingly. Right now, mine looks fine, and also too, if there's a little bit of warpage in that, you can kind of neglect or make up for that in your mounting of this caliper back on there. Okay, so again, I've got this piece screwed in here. I don't really know how far I want it. I've got it sticking pretty far out. As you can see the pad there's a good shot of it. You can see the pad sticking out beyond the red piece there, and that's what you want. It's just a matter of how far do you need to put it. So I'm going to, basically now we're just going to put this caliper, fit the brake pads over the rotor, and position that on there, and then try and line up the holes where the screws go. So it's right about there, and then we try to set the camera down. At this point, before I tighten the screws or anything, I'm just going to hold it where about I think it's going to be with the screws in, and try to spin it a little bit. And it actually seems pretty good. I hear a little bit of rubbing. I'm not sure where it is, but it's not enough that I don't think I can adjust it again by where I'm positioning this rotor. As you can see, there's a little wobble in it. There's a little play depending on where you lock the screws in at, so might be able to adjust that. Again, I'm shooting for trying to get the inner pad as close as possible to the rotor without rubbing, because the closer it is to that pad, the less the disc has to bend when you're putting on your brakes. Okay, so what I did is I put this screw here in first, and just kind of lightly snugged it, didn't tighten it all the way down because I wanted to be able to still play with the movement of this thing, shifting it like this, so to speak, to find out the best place where it was pretty smooth in there without rubbing on either of the pads. So I found that place just again by moving this, and I gotta say this worked out well this time. The amount I turned in that inner pad was just about perfect. If it were too far, you could again just remove the screw, take it off, back off on that screwed in piece a little bit, which would pull the pad back out a little bit. So it might take some trial and error to get where you need to be, but I got lucky and hit it on the first time. If I were any further, it would be too far, but it's pretty good right about where I want it. Try to zoom in there a little bit, so you can see the disc in between the two pads there, and it's nice and tight up against that. Well, I don't want to say tight. It's nice and close up against that inner pad, and actually the outer pad, even without adjusting the brakes yet, is pretty close to it. So this is going to work out well. Tire still spins freely in there. I'm not hearing any rubbing sounds. Maybe a slight rub, but I'm not worried about that. That's not going to slow me down or anything. And as you break in the brakes, it'll adjust to that or wear in a little bit. So I'm happy with that. That's really good. I am normally things don't go that well on the first try, and I'd have to pull the whole caliper up, maybe adjust that inner pad, you know, in or out a little bit. If it were too far in, I'd have to screw it in more to bring it back this way. If it were too far out and rubbing on this too much, and I couldn't adjust it by moving this piece, then I'd have to pull the caliper off and unscrew it a little bit, which will force the pad back in that way a little bit. So that's what we're going for, and that looks really good. I'm happy with that. So I'm going to go ahead and put my other screw in here now and then tighten those down. I'll do another video on the front brakes at some point, but basically you just do the same process. Here's your two mounting bolts for that caliper. You can take those off. You have the same little adjustment deal going on for fine adjustment. Remove those two bolts there. Caliper come off the disc, and just do the same process. Exactly the same caliper, exactly the same process. Front one's actually a little easier because you can see that inner metal piece on the caliper through the rim here. The rim's got nice big holes in it, so you can actually get your wrench through the wheel just like this. You know, actually, yeah, you'd have to take that off to change the brake pads and such. But if you just wanted to adjust this inner pad to get it closer to the disc, or if it was rubbing to back it off a little bit, just stick your wrench right through here. You can tighten that in, move it closer, loosen it to move it back way. So easy to adjust the front ones. Again, if you want to change the pads, then you just simply remove these two screws. 1, 2. Caliper slides off, and then the same process that we just went through for the back brakes. Alright, got both screws in and tightened again now, and then just double checking, make sure everything's still nice and quiet, no excessive rubbing. Looks pretty good. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is the final brake adjustment. Again, first, before anything, I want to take this piece here, and there's basically two pieces to it. There's a nut on the front of it, and then this other part that adjusts. The nut is just so you can lock it in place whenever you do make the adjustment. For now, I'm just going to back the nut off so it's flush up against this other threaded piece, and then I'm going to turn both of them all the way clockwise so it gets rid of the space in between here. That's your starting point for that, and you'll see why in a little bit. Okay, so now I've got that screwed in all the way tight. There's no gap in between here. and that's nice and tight. Now, next thing we want to do is readjust our cable within this arm mechanism here. Again, we have that loose from before, so I want to put it to a certain point, and this is going to determine when this arm moves this way, it's going to push this outer brake pad in towards the rotor. So you want to adjust that so it's close to the rotor but not rubbing again. So you have to, during this process, you want to continue to spin your wheel every time you do something, just to make sure you're not rubbing on that rotor. So right now I'm going to try to do this by setting the camera here and trying to use both my hands. We'll see how well this works, but I'm kind of aiming it with my legs. I got it on my legs here. Okay, so I'm just going to take this wire. You could use like a pliers or something if you need to, but first I'm just going to try to take the tension. I think I will use the pliers. Should use a bigger pair of pliers, but just try and get all the tension out of that cable by pulling it down. And then you can see I'm also pushing this up a little bit here. And again, that's going to move that inner brake pad towards the disc. And I can tell if I get right about here, stop. So right there would be all the way. It would be all the way against the disc. Now I don't want it to be on the disc, so I'm going to back it off a little bit. I think I can let go of this cable here and just hold this with my hand. So I've got it backed off the disc a little bit, and then I'm just going to tighten this screw. And what that does, it locks that cable into that position. Okay. Now that I've done that, I need to spin the wheel, see if it's rubbing. Seems okay. So then after that, you want to try your brakes, pulling the brake lever, and see if it goes a long ways or if it seems pretty tight. And I'm just going to try to aim this camera down here. And then pull on my brake handle. You can see it pulling the arm there, and then that's what's making it contact on the, I don't know how well this is going to show up, but I can't really see on the camera. I'm holding it funny, but you can see the the outer pad moving over to the disc. Now I can see some spacing down there if you look at the right angle, and I'm probably not getting this on the camera, but I can see the space there, and I think I want to make it a little bit tighter. So I'm going to do the same process again. I'm going to loosen the screw back up. This would work better with two people. So one person can kind of hold the thing and the other person can tighten it. And now I want it a little tighter, so I'm going to try to pull more cable through, or in other words, the same effect, pulling more cable through, which the cable's only goes so far, but you can move the arm up towards that direction, which has the same effect of tightening it. Maybe this time I'll try to go too much, because last time I thought I had enough and it wasn't enough. Okay, so I'm going to kind of hold it there. Oh, it slipped back down. So see, with two people this would be a lot easier, obviously. But I think I can do it. Got to hold it just long enough where I can get the screw tightened. I hear a little bit of rubbing going on there, but I don't know if I'm so concerned about that right now. I can see it still looks pretty good in there. Yeah, it's pretty good. And then I'm going to try my brakes again. And that feels good. There's not a lot of play in the brake. I pull it back a little bit. It's contacting that disc. And it's, yeah, you can see it there. I guess I can see it on the camera now. You can see when I'm pulling on my brake lever, it's pulling that arm, which is then pushing the outer disc or the outer brake pad into the disc and pinching it between the two brake pads. That feels good. There's not a lot of play. If I to pull the handle and I had to pull it a long ways, then I'd want to adjust it a little bit more. That looks pretty good right there. Okay, so that's pretty much it, other than if you needed to, let's say you're riding a little bit and you decide your brakes aren't tight enough, or you just get it close but you want to do a fine adjustment on it, then again you can use this piece here. If you unscrew this now, basically counterclockwise, so this comes back down, this whole is threaded, so it's going to come back out this way if you unscrew it. As you do that, it's going to pull the arm back and it's going to push that outer pad in towards the disc more. So you can tighten up your brakes by loosening this, unscrewing it, and then once you get it to where you want, you know that this nut will come with it. For example, if I can start turning it like this, you can see the nuts coming with it. And by doing that, I'm in effect tightening the brakes up a little bit more. Once you got to where you want to, then spin the nut back down and get some pliers or something to lock that into place, so this will no longer turn at that point. That's what the nut's doing. It's kind of locking your adjustment into place. For me right now, I'm going to put it back. Oh, now I got the nut tightened. I'm going to loosen the nut back all the way out so it's on the other piece, and then I can screw the whole piece back in. Now that I did that, I'm going to check my brakes one more time. Pull on the brake lever. Yeah, that feels really good, and it's not bending the disc at all because it's tight up against, or not tight, but it's very close to that inner pad, so it doesn't have to push it far before it starts pinching it. And so that's about it, guys. It's not too hard to do. Again, just basically taking your rotor off is the first step, and then you can easily get those brake pads, clean them up, sand them down a little bit. Main adjustment is on that inner pad by turning that metal piece in, which is going to push that pad, control the adjustment of the pad coming in or out of that caliper. Again, you want to get it, you want to adjust it so it's as close to this disc as possible without rubbing. You obviously don't want a lot of rubbing going on. A little bit of rubbing, I wouldn't really matter. I wouldn't worry about it. It's going to work itself in, and you want it to be close. If you got too much of a gap between the two pads there, especially the inner one, if your inner pad is too far away from this disc, your outer pad's got to work a lot and then push it over to there, and you're actually bending your disc at that point. So you want that inner pad screwed into that hole so it's as close to this disc as possible without constantly rubbing on it. And then that way, when the outer pad, when you pull on the lever, the outer pad pushes the disc, it doesn't have to push it far before it gets pinched between the two brake pads. So that's kind of the whole deal with that. And then your last adjustment again is doing the cable, tightening the cable, holding the wire here, holding the cable here, while pushing the arm up this way will drive the outer brake pad in that way. You just have to find the sweet spot where you want it, tighten on the screw, and then beyond that you can do a fine adjustment after that by using this piece here. Unthreading it will further push the outer brake pad in there. Alright guys, so that's it. It's not hard to do. You know, if you don't know exactly, the main thing is again that inner pad being close to the disc. People don't know that, and that just makes your brakes, if it's not close enough to that disc, it just makes your brakes ineffective pretty much. Alright guys, hope that helps. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to ask down in the comments, and I'll reply to you. Alright guys, take care, have a good one, be safe.